Hi everyone, welcome to this lecture on chapter 10. I am going to do chapter 10 as a two-part lecture just because there's kind of a lot of content in here, so I'll do my best to keep each recording to close to an hour, but we'll see. We'll see how I do. So here's chapter 10, first half. So we're still in the unit on micronutrients, so we're still talking about different vitamins and minerals. And as I said in chapter 8 or chapter 9, the way your textbook organizes the micronutrients is by like systems of the body. So last week we talked about electrolytes, which are a select few minerals that function in maintaining water balance and fluid balance in the body. And then we also talked about the B vitamins and some minerals that support the B vitamins in metabolism. So in chapter 10, we're talking about micronutrients that work as antioxidants. And we're going to talk about several different vitamins, actually, that function as antioxidants. And then selenium will be the primary mineral that we'll talk about in this lecture. So we can start by defining oxidation and antioxidation. Hopefully the term oxidation rings a bell from our conversations about oxidation reduction reactions. So this is the same oxidation, fortunately, and hopefully that makes it easy. This is the same type of oxidation that we talked about when we talked about oxidation reduction. So if you remember that little acronym, oil rig, right? Oxidation is loss and reduction is gain. So when we're talking about oxidation, we're talking about loss of electron, right? And I've got an image coming up. So sorry, I've got an image coming up that will help explain a little bit better this loss of an electron and what that actually looks like and why that's a problem, why we would want to have a means of opposing oxidation, hence antioxidation. So as we'll see in the next few slides, the problem with oxidation is that it does cause damage to our cells. I think the easiest way to think about oxidation is to think about biting into an apple. And I think I've used this example before when we talked about oxidation reduction. If you bite into an apple, especially like, you know, a homegrown apple or one from like a local orchard or something, maybe not one of these like, you know, mega box store apples, but just kind of a homegrown apple. You bite into it, it's going to turn brown, right? The inside of the flesh that's now exposed to the air will turn brown pretty quickly if you were to leave it on the countertop, I mean to say. And so that is actually oxidation happening. That's the inner flesh of the apple and some of the different, actually, vitamin C is in there. So some of the different molecules inside the apple getting exposed to the oxygen and then actually getting damaged in such a way that their color changes to brown. So anyway, we have this process of oxidation happening in our bodies all the time, and we also have these pathways for antioxidation to help balance out and neutralize these oxidation reactions so that we can kind of neutralize or minimize the amount of damage that we're going to experience due to oxidation. So let's see, I think this, sorry, I should have been on this slide. This is everything we just said. Oxidation is a reaction in which an atom loses electrons. Remember, oil rig reduction is when an atom gains electrons. So typically these reactions occur together. That's why we call it redox, right? Because typically oxidation and reduction occur together. And like we saw in chapter 8 and chapter 7, we have a ton of oxidation reduction reactions happening in metabolism. But typically they're happening together so that the electrons are actually exchanged. Like one atom loses, one atom gains, but then there's some other reaction happening where another one is losing, another one is gaining. So there's more of this exchange of electrons rather than like a total loss or a total gain. So where it goes awry is when the exchange isn't like fully complete and atoms wind up being oxidized and like staying oxidized rather than receiving another electron to kind of neutralize themselves. So we have this term called free radical, which is the term given to atoms, unstable atoms, who have an unpaired electron. So if you remember like basic chemistry, most atoms are going to have like electrons. Let's just use like oxygen. Most atoms are going to have electrons in their, some of them have multiple like shells of electrons. And so typically the electrons want to be in pairs, right? And so when an atom has, let's say this top one is going to be unpaired, when it has an unpaired electron, we call this an unstable atom because this lack of an electron pair makes it unstable. So this unstable atom, we can call that a free radical. And it's really these free radicals that are the things that cause damage, because no atom wants to be out there with an unpaired electron in its outer orbit. So this atom is going to go around and we can say steal electrons from anything that it encounters. And so it can basically set off this chain reaction of, you know, this atom steals somebody's electron and then they steal somebody else's, they steal somebody else's, and so on and so on. And it's that chain reaction of oxidation, basically unchecked oxidation reactions that cause damage to our cells and to our tissues. So here's your textbook drawing. This is figure 10.1, again in the 5th edition of the book. And so this is looking at an atom of oxygen. So you've got your protons and your neutrons in the like nucleus. And then as we said, you've got these outer rings of electrons. And in example A, all of the electrons have a pair. So we call this one is stable, right? This is fine. This is how oxygen wants to exist. It's not going to steal anything from anyone. But here, what's being shown is that some other atom over here is losing an electron, and this oxygen happens to pick it up. So this oxygen gains an electron, but is unpaired with any other electron. So this is what we call an unstable oxygen molecule, right? And that's where it becomes a free radical. Yeah. And so typically free radicals actually are oxygen. That's why we're using this example of oxygen. But as we'll see, there are plenty of other atoms that can become unstable. And we're going to see actually, specifically, I think it's more helpful to talk about different molecules in the body that can become free radicals, or that can have a free radical in them. So the two classic examples that we're going to see are LDL cholesterols. And if you remember back to our conversation about lipids and plaque buildup in the arteries in cardiovascular disease, we said that the problem, there are kind of like two parts to the problem in plaque buildup. The first one is that the lining of the artery gets damaged somehow, right? Maybe by too much glucose being in the blood due to hyperglycemia. But then the second issue is when these LDL particles make their way under the lining, right? That like wall of the lining of the arterial wall. And the LDL particles are there actually to help repair the damage. But if there's too many of them, these are really easy targets for this chain of oxidation. And so it's when the LDL particles become oxidized in that like injured part of the arterial wall, that's when we kind of set up this secondary chain reaction of further unstabilization, further inflammation, further plaque buildup. So LDLs are one example of like a larger molecule that can become oxidized and basically act like free radicals. And then the other example are the phospholipids in the cell membrane. So in that phospholipid bilayer, right? It's these phospholipids, and again, you'll kind of notice these are LDLs and phospholipids are lipids. So oftentimes it is more lipid-like molecules that become oxidized. And so again, the fatty acid chain inside the membrane, that can be a site of unchecked oxidation. And so you can set off this cascade of oxidation, electron stealing, if you will, and ultimately make the cell membrane really weak, right? And then the cell membrane won't be able to do its job of kind of managing what comes in and what goes out of the cell. And so then that can make the full organ really weak. And that's actually part of what we see in cancer development. And we'll talk about cancer development at the end of the lecture. So what are some of the causes of these free radicals, right? Why does this ever happen? And hopefully I said already, this happens actually all the time. We, like in metabolism, right? We normally see oxidation reactions. It's just that typically we also see them checked by oxidation reduction. So typically they're working in partnership. We do also see free radical development in the way the immune system works. So a lot of like natural processes in the body, we can see free radical formation. So it's not so much a means of never having free radicals form, it's more a means of managing them as they do form. And as far as environmental factors go, reducing our exposure to free radicals from the environment. So there are plenty of things in our environment that can cause excessive free radical formation. Maybe one of the obvious ones would be cigarette smoking, or even secondhand smoke inhalation from cigarette products or other tobacco products. Asbestos for sure. What else? Even excessive sunlight, and then any sort of air pollution, water pollution, like paint fumes. A lot of cleaning agents actually have like molecules in them that when we inhale them and when they come into our body are going to cause oxidation. Of course, any toxic substances, and of course radiation. So plenty of things to which we're exposed, some of us on a very daily basis. All of these can all cause free radical formation, which can lead to free radical damage or damage caused by free radicals. So let's talk a little more about the damage then. So as I kind of said on the earlier slide, the damage is basically when the molecule, like the LDL particle or the phospholipid molecule, becomes unstable itself and then starts to damage other surrounding cells, and then you wind up with a full organ or a full tissue that might become damaged. That would be the long term. So in cell membrane damage, we're going to see again, free radicals are going to form, like the phospholipid and the phospholipid bilayer, for example. And then that's going to set off this chain reaction of like stealing electrons from the next lipid chain and the next one. So then these damaged lipid particles in the phospholipid bilayer, as I said, cause the cell membrane to lose its integrity. And then that causes damage to the cell. And then that's going to cause damage to all of the systems affected by that cell. So here is a schematic, a drawing of this free radical damage to the phospholipid molecules in the cell membrane. So again, this is figure 10.2 in your book. So here's this kind of telltale image of the free radical. And what we can assume here is that these free radicals are now damaging these phospholipids. And there's actually several free radicals here, but what we would also see is this sort of cascade of free radical damage. So right here, you see where these phospholipids are now so damaged that they start to they stop doing their job, right? They're no longer keeping this membrane intact. The integrity of this membrane is now challenged and defeated, basically. So then over here in image B, enter the antioxidant. Vitamin E is one example of an antioxidant, and there are many different ways that antioxidants act, but ultimately they have the same end effect, which is stabilizing the free radical. So suddenly, over here in image A, these are these really dangerous free radicals, and now with the help of vitamin E, these are no longer dangerous. they're, they've been stabilized. That outer electron that was unpaired has now been paired back up thanks to vitamin E, and this is no longer a noxious, dangerous atom. So we're going to talk about, at the end of the lecture, we're going to talk about cancer. We're going to revisit heart disease a little bit. But here is kind of a short list of diseases that are associated with free radical damage. So cancer and heart disease are the two obvious, well, not obvious ones, but the two that we've already actually pointed out, right? Damage to the phospholipid bilayer and damage to the LDL, oxidation to the LDL particles that are building up in the arterial wall. Type 2 diabetes can certainly, especially in a prolonged state or like many years with type 2 diabetes unmanaged, we can see lots of side effects that are caused by free radical damage. Arthritis, cataracts are associated with free radical damage, and then also Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. So free radical damage to some of these molecules inside of the brain, leading to dysfunctioning of the brain. And so some of these also, a lot of times also, where we see free radical damage to the cell membrane, we also see free radical damage to the DNA, because ultimately those free radicals can damage pretty much anything inside of the cell. So that damage to the DNA is something that we also see in cancer quite a bit. Okay, so we've started to introduce the antioxidants now a little bit, but we can say more here. So again, the word antioxidant, right? It just means it opposes the oxidant. It opposes the free radical, right? So the antioxidant opposes oxidation. They stabilize free radicals. Pretty short and simple. Antioxidant vitamins, so like vitamin E, like we just saw, how do they stabilize free radicals? They stabilize free radicals by giving away an electron. So donating an electron or a hydrogen molecule. Remember, wherever the electron goes, usually there's a hydrogen molecule going too. And that's how they stabilize free radicals. We also have minerals that act as antioxidants, but again, their mechanism of action is slightly different. So minerals act as cofactors. You might remember we talked about cofactors and coenzymes being these critical components of the active enzyme structure. So we need cofactors or we need coenzymes to actually bind with the inactive enzyme and thus activate it. So minerals act as antioxidants by way of acting as cofactors with what we call antioxidant enzyme systems. And then this full antioxidant enzyme system converts the free radicals into some other, into a different form so that it is a less damaging substance. And then they support, these enzyme systems support the excretion of those now benign substances. And then a third type of antioxidant we have, which we will just barely brush the surface of in this class, is phytochemicals. So phyto meaning plant. I'll write it in tiny font. Plant chemicals, right? So basically plant, these chemicals, these molecules that we find only in plants that also work to stabilize free radicals and prevent the damage that they would otherwise cause. So how do antioxidant enzyme systems work? Right, so they convert the free radical to a less damaging substance. They can even break down the fatty acids, like the fatty acids in the low-density lipoprotein or the fatty acids in the phospholipid that have been damaged. And then again, help to remove these from the body. And then antioxidant enzyme systems can also help to rejuvenate or recycle, I guess would be the word, recycle vitamins that work as antioxidants so that we can reuse them and keep reusing them to support further free radical stabilization. Oh, boy, those look similar. So these are the 3 antioxidant enzyme systems that we'll introduce in this course. And I know these are kind of big, funky names. Yeah, so superoxide dismutase is one antioxidant system. In particular, superoxide dismutase does a lot of work on neutralizing hydrogen peroxide. So this can be a common free radical. Catalase also supports neutralizing hydrogen peroxide and specifically supports the removal of hydrogen peroxide from the body. And then same with glutathione peroxidase, supports removing hydrogen peroxide after it's been, after it's been kind of neutralized. And then, so here is just kind of revisiting the vitamins and selenium, the vitamins and the one mineral that we're going to look at that support, that act as antioxidants, I mean to say. So again, vitamin E, vitamin C, vitamin A, beta carotene, which is one example of a phytochemical that we'll look at, and then selenium. So these all act in different ways to stabilize free radicals and thereby prevent the damage that these free radicals might cause to cells or tissues. I think I'm realizing here I think I misspoke just a second ago. So I think that I tried to imply that hydrogen peroxide can be a free radical, but actually hydrogen peroxide is the less damaging molecule to which some free radicals will be converted. And then hydrogen peroxide is what gets removed from the body. So just clarifying that. So this is a review of the RDA values, the recommended dietary allowances for these 5 micronutrients that we'll discuss in this chapter. So you don't need to commit any of these to memory, but just kind of an FYI. Also interesting here that vitamin C, for anyone who smokes cigarettes, the recommendation for vitamin C goes up. And that's because we know that smoking is so damaging to the lungs by way of free radical damage. And then beta carotene, we don't have dietary reference intake values for phytonutrients at this time. So beta carotene does not have an RDA for it at this time. All right, so we can get started. We'll start with vitamin E, and same thing as we've done so far as in chapter 8 and chapter 9. I do want you to identify the nutrient, any other names that it might have, like vitamin E is sometimes referred to as a tocopherol or a tocotrienol. I want you to understand, right, that vitamin E works as an antioxidant. And then I want you to be able to identify if there are any issues of deficiency or toxicity, and also common food sources for these different nutrients. So vitamin E is one of our fat-soluble vitamins. And I believe this is the first time we're introducing a specific fat-soluble vitamin. So I'm going to write up here, vitamin D, E, A, and K are our fat-soluble vitamins. There's only 4 of them. So however you want to remember vitamin D, E, A, and K. So this means that we are going to find them in fat foods, so foods that have some amount of fat, and that also means that we need that fat to absorb them. And then it also means that we can store these in our adipose. So down here it says 90% of vitamin E is stored in adipose tissue, and some of it is also stored in our cell membranes. And so if I were to go all the way back here, remember this is the phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane. Some amount of vitamin E in a healthy individual already exists in the phospholipid bilayer, in part so that if free radical damage starts to occur, or if free radicals start to occur, vitamin E is already there to help mitigate that damage, or mitigate the free radical, stabilize the free radical before too much damage actually occurs. So fat-soluble vitamins, we do store quite a bit of them in our adipose tissue, sometimes in the liver, and sometimes small amounts in other fatty parts of the body or of the cell, like the cell membrane. So then that also means, because it's fat soluble, that it has to travel by way of a fat-friendly molecule in the blood. So if you might remember the chylomicron, when we talked about how different lipid components get packaged in the enterocyte of the small intestine to then be transported through the blood, first through the lymph and then through the blood, to be delivered to various cells of the body. So vitamin E would also get packaged into that chylomicron. And then that means as the chylomicron kind of circulates and becomes a VLDL and then an LDL, right, a very low density lipoprotein and a low density lipoprotein, if we have enough vitamin E will still be transported in these like lipid transport molecules in the blood. Okay, so like I said, vitamin E is it's kind of like an umbrella term. So there are two like types of vitamin E. They're like classes or families of vitamin E. So there's actually, I want to say there's more like 8 different types of tocotrienols and tocopherols together. So if you see tocotrienol and tocopherol, begin to familiarize yourself with the fact that we're talking about vitamin E. So the tocopherols are the ones that are actually active. So we find, for example, alpha tocopherol in most of our foods. And if you take a vitamin E supplement, or if you take a multivitamin, or if a food has been fortified with vitamin E, you'll probably see alpha tocopherol instead of vitamin E written in the ingredients lists or written like in that supplement facts label. And so because there are so many different forms of vitamin E, the RDA for vitamin E is expressed as alpha tocopherol equivalents. Here it is, expressed as alpha tocopherol equivalents, and sometimes expressed as international units, because what we're really most interested in is, you know, how much active form of this nutrient is in this food. So whatever other form it might occur in, what we want to know is, okay, how much of that form converts to active alpha tocopherol. So let's go. Yeah, so here's vitamin E. You'll notice the RDA is written as 15 milligrams of alpha tocopherol. So sometimes you might see it written as, again, alpha equivalents or international units. So don't be too confused if you see that. And again, if it is already in alpha tocopherol form, they'll probably just express it as milligrams per day. So here is your alpha tocopherol structure, and you can see it has a carbon tail that is quite similar to what fatty acid tails look like. Then it also has a ringed like backbone structure, also might remind you of what a sterol looks like. So again, hopefully just by seeing the visual of this molecule, it will remind you enough of lipids, and that can also be something that reminds you of the fact that this is fat soluble. So what are the functions of vitamin E? Well, as we've said, vitamin E acts as an antioxidant. So we talked about vitamin E acting specifically in the cell membrane, but then there are some other things that vitamin E can do, some other places that vitamin E can work to reduce free radical damage. So vitamin E helps to protect our polyunsaturated fatty acids. So you might remember we talked about omega-6 and omega-3 that support inflammation and anti-inflammation. So vitamin E works really closely in those processes. We're also going to see, again, the fatty cell components, especially that cell phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane being protected by vitamin E. And vitamin E can also protect the low density lipoproteins from oxidation. which means vitamin E is actually a really powerful component of reducing the risk for heart disease, and even preventing heart disease. So vitamin E also protects red blood cell membranes as well as lung cells. Vitamin E does have some anticoagulant properties, which means, so anticoagulant. So coagulant means to coagulate or to like clot or clump together. So vitamin E actually opposes clot formation. Vitamin E can also support healthy nerve and muscle development early in life. Because of its role in supporting our polyunsaturated fatty acids and protecting LDLs from oxidation, vitamin E supports our immune system. Vitamin E can also support vitamin A absorption, so like enhancing or increasing vitamin A absorption, especially if our intake of vitamin A is low. Again, the RDA for vitamin E is 15 milligrams of alpha tocopherol or alpha tocopherol equivalents. This amount is based on enough vitamin E that would prevent erythrocyte hemolysis, which is the rupturing of red blood cells or the breaking apart of red blood cells. And so again, you may not know the word erythrocyte unless you've taken anatomy physiology, but that's kind of the technical term for a red blood cell. And lysis, hopefully you're starting to identify this now as meaning like break apart. So, so one might argue that having just enough vitamin E to prevent erythrocyte hemolysis, it might not be quite enough, right? Because maybe we want more than just preventing our red blood cells from breaking apart. Because vitamin E is fat soluble though, a tolerable upper intake level has been determined, and that's at 1,000 milligrams of alpha tocopherol equivalents per day. So if you are supplementing with vitamin E, definitely wise to not exceed this limit on a daily basis. And this is again because we can store vitamin E in our bodies, in our adipose tissue, and a little bit in our cell membranes. So with most fat-soluble vitamins, RDA might be set a little bit lower, and a tolerable upper intake level is likely to be established because we can reach toxic levels or toxicity levels with fat-soluble vitamins because we can store them. Food sources of vitamin E, pretty widespread in plant foods. Again, you're going to want to look for fat-containing foods. So your food sources are listed right here. Many nuts, especially pumpkin seeds. Well, these are seeds, but pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. Those are the two I think of. Soybeans are also a source, and avocado is also a good source of vitamin E. Remember, as with all vitamins, these are molecules. I could go back here, right? These are molecules. These are larger structures made up of many different atoms, and that means they can be destroyed. So exposure to air, exposure to different metals, exposure to UV light, and exposure to heat will all destroy vitamin E. So again, that's why many supplements, especially vitamin supplements, come in an opaque container, and they suggest that you store it in a cool, dark place so that you avoid exposure to oxygen, light, and heat. And so then, of course, any sort of cooking that uses heat, any sort of cooking that uses heat, so frying, processing things, is going to destroy the vitamin E. So in particular, that means that like processed foods and fast foods contain very little vitamin E, perhaps not surprisingly. So you really find this in pretty fresh, unprocessed foods. So it'd be like, add some pumpkin seeds to your salad, or some avocado, or some nuts, right? I should totally erase these top lines because it's always boxed cereal. So ignore that. Maybe I should erase that arrow. Ignore the top line and actually look at the foods. So again, sunflower seeds, almonds, avocado, peanut butter, peanuts, spinach. So here's your RDA. Sunflower seeds, that's a 1/4 cup. avocado would be 1 whole avocado. So you might have to work a little bit to make sure you're getting enough vitamin E per day. But again, yes, you can you can get some, I'll put the arrow back, you can get some vitamin E from foods that have been fortified with the nutrient, meaning that nutrient was added into the food after processing. Not the best way to get it, but yeah, can contribute to your overall intake. And then again, we do see toxicity with fat-soluble vitamins because we can store them. So again, typically we're only going to see toxicity due to high supplement intake. Side effects would include nausea, intestinal distress, and diarrhea. Long-term may cause hemorrhagic stroke, remember in part because it has that anticoagulant activity. So this can also be particularly dangerous for anybody who has vascular disease. So not recommended to supplement if you have vascular disease, better to just pick food sources that are good, rich in vitamin E. And then again, anybody taking a coagulant, especially like Coumadin, might, again, would not recommend vitamin E supplementation for Coumadin intake. You can still safely take the RDA of vitamin E, and you should, even if you're on Coumadin. What happens if we are deficient in vitamin E? So far, deficiency is relatively uncommon, especially because we can store it. If we do see deficiency, typically there's underlying fat malabsorption issues, and symptoms would be that erythrocyte hemolysis, so that rupturing of the red blood cells, and that can lead to anemia, right, if you have a low red blood cell count. Symptoms would be loss of muscle coordination and loss of reflexes, impaired vision and impaired speech, and also impaired immunity. So pretty dangerous, but again, fortunately, we don't typically see excessive vitamin D deficiency. Again, the primary issue would be underlying fat malabsorption. All right, vitamin C. So vitamin C is water soluble. And again, when we talk about the full class of vitamins, it's really actually vitamin C and then the B vitamins that are water soluble. So that's kind of easy. All the rest are fat soluble. So vitamin C also has two common forms, two active forms, ascorbic acid and dehydroascorbic acid. You might commonly see ascorbic acid in some of your packaged foods. It can definitely be used as a preservative. Vitamin C has lots of jobs, lots of jobs in the body. We talk about it here as an antioxidant, but some of the other things it can do, vitamin C is actually really critical for collagen synthesis. Everybody's all into taking collagen these days, which makes me furrow my eyebrows, but vitamin C might actually be the thing worth taking because we need vitamin C to actually build those collagen fibers. And believe it or not, ingesting collagen doesn't mean that that collagen just makes its way into your joints and suddenly you have new collagen. As we talked about in the protein lecture, you break the collagen down and you absorb the amino acid components. And then if you need collagen, maybe you would use some of those amino acids to build your own collagen. So really, it's actually, I would suggest, more critical to ingest some of the nutrients that support collagen formation, because we don't just ingest collagen and then magically put that collagen into our joints where we need it. Anyways, so then we do see vitamin C also supports DNA synthesis, bile formation, neurotransmitter synthesis, carnitine synthesis, and hormone synthesis. So vitamin C is a pretty critical nutrient. Yeah, but for our purposes, I think the two that we highlight in this chapter are collagen and, of course, its antioxidant role. So here are the two forms or isomers of vitamin C. You have ascorbic acid and dehydroascorbic acid. And it's actually showing you the loss of the electrons to donate to the free radicals to quell them. And so that's actually how ascorbic acid and dehydroascorbic acid convert between each other, is this loss or gain of electrons. Here's a cool little schematic just showing, these are collagen fibers, and if you break them down to look at the individual strands and then the chains that make up the strands, you'll see that it is actually vitamin C that enables these collagen chains to kind of cross-link and start to hold to each other in order to form collagen strands. And yet more functions. So here's where we will talk about the antioxidant role of vitamin C. So vitamin C is pretty critical in protecting those LDL cholesterols from oxidation. So again, helpful to prevent and reduce risk for heart disease. Also supports the lungs from ozone damage and cigarette damage. So again, that's why vitamin C, the RDA for vitamin C increases for cigarette smokers. And vitamin C also protects white blood cells from oxidation. That's why we often say that vitamin C is so important when you're feeling sick or if you have a cold, that vitamin C supports your immune system. Vitamin C also acts as an antioxidant by reducing these compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are compounds that form in cured and processed and like grilled or smoked meats. So again, typically processed meats. And nitrosamines we know are cancer-causing agents. This is actually why the World Health Organization has deemed processed meats known carcinogens is because of these nitrosamine compounds that form. We know that they cause cancer. So reducing your intake of processed meat is always a good step for health. And then I guess if you're going to have processed meat, make sure to have something with a heck of a lot of vitamin C in it when you eat that processed meat. So vitamin C can actually reduce these nitrosamines, meaning stabilize them. Vitamin C can also help regenerate vitamin E. So again, kind of recycling vitamin E once it's become oxidized, like once vitamin E has acted as an antioxidant itself, vitamin C can actually help regenerate vitamin E so it can act again. And then this seems to be increasingly common knowledge, but vitamin C can also enhance or support iron absorption, particularly iron that we might absorb from plant foods. We'll talk about that when we talk about the micronutrients in blood. So here is vitamin C regenerating vitamin E. And again, you'll see, remember we've talked about now, like vitamin E and vitamin C have these different forms. So basically as they're like changing, transferring electrons between them, they are each kind of changing into these other forms. There's also, we mentioned that antioxidant enzyme system, glutathione peroxidase. So vitamin C can also help regenerate glutathione in that antioxidant system. So vitamin C is pretty powerful. It acts as an antioxidant itself, and it helps to regenerate some of these other antioxidants. Or, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Well, it works both ways, I guess, but glutathione can also help regenerate vitamin C when vitamin C has acted as the antioxidant. Vitamin C requirements. So the recommended dietary allowance is 90 milligrams a day for males, 75 milligrams a day for females. There is a suggested upper limit for vitamin C, although there's less issue with overconsumption of vitamin C because it is water soluble, so we will just excrete it or eliminate it. But an upper limit has been established, and that's 2,000 milligrams a day for adults. Remember, smokers require an additional, anyone who smokes cigarettes routinely should consume an extra 35 milligrams per day on top of the RDA. And then other situations where higher vitamin C intake might be recommended would be anywhere that your immune system is going to be working harder. So healing from traumatic injury, surgery, burn, illness. And then also the use of oral contraceptives, making sure to get enough or potentially even a little more than the RDA of vitamin C is often recommended. Fortunately, vitamin C is pretty abundant, especially in our fresh fruits and vegetables. Again, it is a vitamin, so it will be destroyed by heat and oxygen. Yeah, so in order to minimize the loss of vitamin C when you're cooking, try steaming or microwaving or stir frying. Some vitamin E, especially if you're cooking at low enough temperatures, can actually leach into the boiling water, and when it cools, you can drink that water and get some vitamin C that way. So again, food sources of vitamin E, vitamin C. 1 cup of fresh strawberries would actually meet the RDA for females. Bell peppers are also a great source of vitamin C. Then you can see grapefruit, oranges, kiwi, broccoli, cauliflower, pineapple, sweet potato, tomatoes. So lots of different foods are good sources there. Apples actually also have a pretty good amount of vitamin C. They're not listed here. But again, remember, if you are sick, if you do have an illness, if you're recovering from any sort of injury or surgery, if you are taking oral contraceptives, you would want to consume more than 1 cup of fresh strawberries per day, or if you're cigarette smoking. Again, if we have too much vitamin C, we can just excrete the excess. So there is not really any sort of issue with toxicity. Yeah, and again, typically that megadose level can only be achieved by supplementation. So this concept of megadosing is like when you've taken a lot of the supplement for a long period of time. So long-term intake of more than that upper limit can lead to, especially diarrhea would be maybe one of the first symptoms. Can also lead to nausea, could lead to some nose bleeding, and could lead to abdominal cramping. This would definitely be dangerous for anybody who has hemochromatosis, which is an excess accumulation of iron in the body. So megadosing isn't generally recommended anyhow. It may sometimes be prescribed by some like naturopathic doctors or even just regular doctors who are nutritionally aware, because sometimes megadosing can be helpful, especially if somebody's very sick or again recovering from a trauma or an injury. But it shouldn't, generally probably shouldn't exceed a few days, maybe a week, and then the person should wean back off of you don't even have to wean actually, but should stop consuming the megadosing amounts. And then what happens if we don't have enough vitamin C? So lack of vitamin C is relatively rare in developed countries. You might be familiar with scurvy. There's that, I feel like it's one of the more common like nutrition stories, is like sailors on a ship who had a bunch of fresh fruit when they set sail, but after a few weeks, and it's not a story, it's how scurvy was first discovered. So after a few weeks at sea, they ran out of their fresh fruit and vegetable, and by the time they landed across the ocean, many of them had these symptoms of bleeding gums, loose teeth, extreme fatigue and weakness, wounds that wouldn't heal, bone pain, fractures, diarrhea, etc. So all of that was because they had not had vitamin C on that last like half of their voyage at sea. And so that's what scurvy is the lack of vitamin C. So that's the most common vitamin C deficiency. Anemia can also result from lack of vitamin C. And let's see, people who are most at risk for deficiency of vitamin C are people who don't consume enough fruit and vegetable, and people who consume too much alcohol and abuse drugs on a routine basis. Alrighty, and then we'll talk about selenium. So this, I believe, this is the only mineral that we're going to talk about in this chapter. I'll say here, I don't think I've mentioned trace and major minerals just yet. So For my purposes, it's not important to me that you know which minerals are trace and which minerals are major. But again, you can read your book to learn a little bit more about this, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Major minerals are minerals that we need in the body in larger amounts. And actually the ones we talked about in chapter 9, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, those are considered major minerals. And then trace minerals are minerals that we require in smaller amounts. So like the RDA for the trace minerals will be lower than the RDA for major minerals. So selenium is one of our trace minerals, which means we don't need to take in a lot of selenium on a daily basis. We find selenium actually also in many amino acids. And so there are some like amino acid derivatives in our food, which is where basically how we get selenium. So we can find selenomethionine and we can find selenocysteine. So methionine and cysteine are two amino acids. Selenocysteine is the active form of selenium, and it's this form of selenium that we're going to find in the glutathione peroxidase enzyme system, antioxidant enzyme system. One of the roles of selenium, can you hear my cat screaming? One of the other roles of selenium is that it can also help spare vitamin E. So when we have enough selenium to support glutathione peroxidase, basically allows us to save vitamin E for other uses. Selenium is also used to make thyroxine, which is one of our thyroid hormones. And as we talked about briefly in one of the earlier lectures, your thyroid is important for maintaining basic metabolism and body temperature. We do find that low selenium intake, which is what we mean when we say poor status. So poor status means that we don't have enough selenium in the body. That means we're not going to have enough active glutathione peroxidase. And what we see as a major consequence of that is cancer development. So here is like peroxide molecules. And if they go, so these can become free radicals. And so if they can become free radicals, they can cause oxidative damage. But it is specifically peroxide molecules on which glutathione peroxidase acts. And so glutathione peroxidase is only active if selenium is present. And so glutathione peroxidase with selenium can then neutralize peroxide molecules. They can actually be neutralized to water. And then again, we can eliminate or excrete water in the urine or use it for other processes. So the RDA for selenium is just 55 micrograms. This sort of U-like symbol means microgram instead of milligram. So it's a smaller amount than micrograms. There is a suggested upper limit for selenium, which is 400 micrograms per day. And the best food sources of selenium, I always think of nuts, like especially Brazil nuts. I think it is that you can eat just 2 Brazil nuts per day and you've met your selenium requirement. And then seafood can also be a good source of selenium. So here are your food sources. I guess Brazil nut did not make it on the chart, but you can see, let's see, do they have any? So mixed nuts, like 1 ounce of mixed nuts. Doesn't quite get you there, but it's a good chunk towards your daily need. And you may find some in some whole grains or in some fortified grain foods. And then again, seafood would be a good source too. So toxicity can occur with selenium. Again, typically that's only going to happen from oversupplementation. What we would see is brittle hair and nails. You could also see some skin rashes. You could see vomiting, nausea, weakness, and potentially even cirrhosis of the liver. I wouldn't say selenium toxicity is all that common in the United States, but again, it certainly can happen from overconsumption via supplementation. And then we can also see deficiency, issues with selenium deficiency. That's probably more common. So we can see something called Caisson disease, which is a type of heart disease. And it's a heart disease caused by selenium deficiency. And basically the lack of selenium, meaning the lack of active glutathione peroxidase, impairs the immune system, and then the immune system is not strong enough to fight disease. So in this case, viruses like Caisson disease is actually caused by a virus in conjunction with the selenium deficiency. So the lack of selenium basically weakens the immune system, weakens the immune system's ability to fight off this virus. And then there's a similar issue, a similarly named issue, but a very different disease. So there's something called Cauchin-Beck disease, which is actually a cartilage disease. And so it's a malformation of cartilage and like a deformation then of cartilage, leading to a deforming form of arthritis. Again, due to a selenium deficiency, which kind of weakens that overall antioxidant ability of the body. And then in Cauchin-Beck disease, the part of the body that gets damaged due to the oxidation is the cartilage. So winding up with this deforming arthritis. Other things we can see would be infertility, depression, impaired mood and cognitive function, muscle wasting and pain. And then we can also see cretinism, which is we saw with iodine deficiency in infants, again, if the pregnant mother is selenium deficient. So cretinism is a form of mental retardation. And then here is an example of Cauchin-Beck disease with the deforming arthritis. So we don't see a ton of this in developed countries, but we definitely see more of it in parts of the world where access to a wide variety of foods is relatively limited, and also in parts of the world where the soil might actually be relatively selenium deficient, because obviously plants are only going to have selenium in them if the soil had selenium in them. And then in parts of China and Tibet, in these mountainous regions, there's really nowhere near the sea, so access to seafood would be rather limited too. And then there are some other minerals there are actually lots of other minerals that work as antioxidants. We won't talk about them in as much depth in this chapter. We'll actually talk about them in other body systems. But copper, zinc, and manganese all support antioxidant functioning. These are all minerals, so they're all going to work as cofactors. So these three all happen to support the superoxide dismutase antioxidant enzyme system. They all act as coenzymes with some of the different enzymes in this complex. And then iron, in addition to like heme formation with red blood cells, iron supports the antioxidant enzyme catalase. And then manganese can also support different enzymes in metabolism, and copper, iron, and zinc also support blood health. So that's where we're going to talk about those, is in the blood health lecture. And sorry, I didn't mean to make that look like a line through. Okay, so for part 1 of this chapter, I'm going to stop here. And for part 2, we'll pick up with beta carotene. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in part 2.